Alright, let's talk about what just happened in Berea, because if you blinked during Cleveland's third day of training camp, you missed something that might end up defining this entire quarterback race before August even gets rolling. I've gone through every rep, every read, every misfire, and I need to walk you through it the way I saw it unfold, because numbers on a stat sheet don't tell you the full story. The story is in the details, and today's practice was loaded with them. Fan Day at Browns camp always carries a different kind of electricity. There's a crowd, there's noise, there's pressure that isn't quite the same as an empty practice field with just coaches and cameras. And on a day like that, guys either rise to the moment or they shrink from it. Today, we saw both. We saw a rookie receiver turn heads, we saw a quarterback continue building a case for QB1, and we saw another quarterback take another gut punch of a turnover that's starting to feel like a pattern instead of a fluke. Before I break down the on-field action, I want to give you some insight into what Cleveland's coaching staff is actually trying to build here, because context matters. Offensive coordinator Todd Monken addressed the media before the pads even came on, and what he described wasn't just a random practice, it was a calculated, layered installation process. Day 1 was all about quick game concepts. Day 2 shifted into triangle reads, the kind of progression work that forces a quarterback to process multiple options in rhythm. And today, Day 3, the install moved into 3-level route concepts, the deep, intermediate, short combinations that stress a defense vertically while giving the quarterback answers at every level of the field. On top of that, Monken specified that this particular session was built around third and extra long situations, an evolution from third medium looks on Day 1 to third long on Day 2, now stacking into the toughest conversion scenario there is. They were also working no-huddle tempo and padding up the practice length from an hour and a half to nearly 2 full hours. Here's why that detail actually matters for the story I'm about to tell you. Monken specifically mentioned that quarterbacks were being coached to intentionally hold the football longer during this drill work, to simulate scramble situations and off-schedule plays outside the pocket. That's not a small detail. That changes how you interpret some of what happened later in practice. Because when a quarterback is instructed to extend a play and buy time rather than get rid of the ball immediately, decision-making becomes even more exposed. Every hesitation, every miscalculation gets magnified. Keep that in the back of your mind, because it's going to matter when we get into the turnovers. Now let's talk about the moment that had absolutely nothing to do with quarterback controversy and everything to do with a legend simply showing up. Deion Sanders made an appearance at Browns camp, and predictably, the football world had a reaction. Some of the noise online tried to frame his presence as awkward, or even distracting, given that his son is currently in a heated quarterback competition for the starting job. But two of the most respected voices in the business shut that narrative down almost instantly. Adam Schefter didn't hesitate to point out that Prime is regarded across every level of football he's ever touched as one of the most electrifying players the sport has ever produced, someone who commands respect wherever he walks into a building. Pat McAfee doubled down on that sentiment, essentially saying that anyone treating Deion's presence as some kind of problem simply doesn't understand who the man is. Their point was simple. Deion isn't a distraction. He's positivity walking through the door. He's the kind of presence that lifts a locker room rather than dividing it, and honestly, I agree with them completely. This idea that his presence creates tension is manufactured outrage, nothing more. The man has earned the right to walk into any training camp in this league, son competing for a job or not. Alright, now let's get into the part of this update that's honestly starting to feel a little uncomfortable if you're a Deshaun Watson believer. For the third consecutive practice, Watson turned the football over. 3 practices, 3 interceptions. Let that sink in for a second, because in a vacuum, 1 bad rep happens to everybody. 2 starts to raise an eyebrow. 3 in a row, during a camp where every single throw is being dissected by fans, media, and a front office deciding who leads this offense, that's when it stops being noise and starts becoming a real storyline. I slowed the tape down on this one because I wanted to see exactly what went wrong, and it wasn't good. Watson had a running back sitting wide open in the flat, a clean, low-risk completion sitting right there for the taking. Instead, he pulled the trigger toward Isaiah Bond, who was blanketed, sitting in a phone booth with two defenders around him. Both underneath and deep coverage collapsed on that route, and the ball never had a chance. It was picked off over the middle. When you have an easier, safer option available and you still choose to test tight coverage, that's not bad luck, that's a process issue, and it's exactly the kind of decision-making question marks that have followed him. But Watson wasn't the only quarterback who had a moment to forget today. During 2-minute drill work, Dillon Gabriel threw an interception that honestly might be even harder to defend than Watson's. This wasn't a case of bad coverage disguise or a miscommunication with a receiver. This was a quarterback throwing the ball directly into the hands of a linebacker sitting right in his throwing lane. I went back and watched it from a different camera angle just to make sure I wasn't being too harsh, and it confirmed what I initially thought. Gabriel simply could not see over his offensive line to identify where that defender was sitting. His height limitations, something that's been a talking point about him since college, showed up in a very real, very costly way in that exact moment. And look, I'll say this plainly because it needs to be said. In this league, on plays like that, quarterbacks don't get released with a trade package attached. They get cut. Turning the ball over on plays like that, live reps in front of the front office, is the kind of thing that shortens careers before they even get going. Now let's get into the moment of this entire practice that had everybody buzzing, because if you were tracking the reaction from reporters and fans on site, this was the story of the day. Rookie wide receiver Denzel Boston turned in what multiple reporters on the ground called the best individual play through 3 days of camp, and I'm inclined to agree after watching it. Boston ran a sharp, precise corner route, and Shedeur Sanders delivered a strike into a tight window, the kind of accuracy and timing that live reps either reveal or expose. According to reporters who were physically standing on that practice field, the crowd erupted. Not a polite golf clap, an actual eruption. That's the type of moment that tells you something intangible is starting to build between a young quarterback and a young receiver, a rhythm that can't be manufactured. It has to be earned rep after rep. And that wasn't a one-off. Boston backed it up throughout the entire session. On a separate rep, Shedeur worked the huddle with second-team personnel, showcasing his command at the line of scrimmage, using what's called cadence, which for those of you newer to the game, means the verbal calls and adjustments a quarterback makes before the snap. Sometimes it's a legitimate protection change or route adjustment. Other times it's pure misdirection, a quarterback saying something as simple as a repeated word just to bait the defense into showing their hand early. Watching Shedeur operate that part of the game with confidence, especially against a defense that's live and reacting, tells you his processing is ahead of where a lot of rookies typically are at this stage. From there, Shedeur ran a play-action concept and found his running back on a simple check down into the flat, nothing flashy, but exactly the type of disciplined decision-making that wins football games. That's actually one of the more encouraging developments in his game this camp. He's not forcing outcomes. He understands that moving the chains consistently, staying ahead of the sticks, eventually opens up the explosive plays down the field. Too many young quarterbacks try to be a hero on every single snap. Shedeur, at least through 3 practices, is showing patience, letting the offense breathe instead of trying to manufacture highlights out of nothing. Then came another eye-catching rep, this time on a wheel route where a running back named Casey hauled in an impressive contested catch. In 7-on-7 work shortly after, Shedeur found Boston again, this time on a comeback route, another rep where Boston separated from coverage at the top of his stem and made the target look easy. I'll say it again because it deserves repeating. Boston is putting together the kind of camp performance that makes a receiver impossible to ignore heading into the regular season conversation. Shedeur continued distributing the football efficiently from there, hitting a quick hitch to a player wearing number 48, and later, off a well-disguised motion concept, dropping a strike right into the bucket to Boston again on a crossing route. During 11-on-11 work, he pushed the ball outside the numbers to Ryan on an out route, another rep that required timing and anticipation rather than pure arm talent, and he executed it cleanly. But if there was one throw today that symbolized exactly why some people inside that building are starting to lean towards Shedeur, it was this next one. In 11-on-11, with the defense rotating late, Shedeur threaded a pinpoint throw between a cornerback and a safety, hitting Tylan Wallace in stride on a hole shot that required perfect placement and zero margin for error. And here's the detail that made this moment even bigger than just a nice throw on a random Tuesday. General Manager Andrew Berea and team owner Jimmy Haslam were both standing right there, watching that exact rep unfold in real time, not reviewing it on film later, not hearing about it secondhand from coaches. They saw it live, in person, from a matter of feet away. When the two most powerful decision-makers in that entire organization are physically present for one of the most impressive throws of camp, that's not just a highlight. That's a moment that potentially shapes how a front office starts framing its quarterback decision. All right, let's get into the actual numbers, because through 3 days, the tracker is starting to paint a pretty clear picture. Shadur Sanders finished the day completing 21 of 26 passes, 0 touchdowns, but more importantly, 0 interceptions. 3 days in, and he still hasn't turned the football over once. In a camp battle, that kind of week-to-week consistency and ball security often speaks louder than a couple of flashy touchdown throws. Deshaun Watson, meanwhile, went 18 of 27 with another interception today, pushing his total to 3 picks through 3 practices, a pattern that's genuinely becoming difficult to overlook. Dillon Gabriel finished 11 of 17 with a touchdown, but also another interception, giving him 2 turnovers across the first 3 days. And then you have the fourth arm in the room getting limited work, managing 4 completions on 5 attempts, mostly just accumulating whatever reps he can find in a crowded quarterback room. So where does that leave us heading into day 4? Look, I know it's still incredibly early, and I know a strong preseason camp doesn't guarantee anything once real bullets start flying in September. But if I'm being completely honest with you, and if you've been watching the tape as closely as I have, the answer right now is pretty clear. If Cleveland had to roll out a starter tomorrow based purely on what's happened through 3 practices, it's Shedeur Sanders. He's protecting the football, he's operating with poise in front of a live crowd, he's building real chemistry with a rookie receiver who's quickly turning into one of the more electric stories of this entire training camp, and he did all of that with the general manager and the owner watching in person. This quarterback competition is far from over, and I promise you I'll keep tracking every single practice, every read, every stat line, so you're never behind on how this thing is trending. But right now, through 3 days, the tape doesn't lie, and neither does the tracker. Shedeur Sanders is building momentum at exactly the right time, and it's going to be fascinating to see if he can keep this pace going as the pads keep coming on, and the competition only gets tougher from here.